Hello and good morning. Thank you for tuning in to Pantau Belanjawan with me, Nabila Khalida. As we edge closer to Belanjawan 2026, the big question is, can this be the structural reset Malaysia's property market needs? And with affordability pressures, unsold units and shifting demographics, the stakes are high for both policymakers and home buyers. So to unpack what the coming budget could really mean for developers, investors and families, I'm joined by surveyor Sulaiman Saheh, the Director of Research and Consultancy Services at Rahim Co International, Senang Berhad. Sulaiman, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Good morning, amazing. So from Rahim & Co's lens, what single metric would you point to that best captures the current health of Malaysia's property market going into Belanjawan 2026?
First, we have to actually just have a bit of a recap as to how the property market is actually currently performing. After a good performance in 2024, the numbers were moderated a bit in 2025, first half, with the number of transactions actually reduced by 1.2%, although the total value of transactions actually increased by almost 2%. Looking at the property market as to how do we gauge how healthy it is, one measure would be how active is the market, which means that the number of transactions, are people buying the property, which reflects the level of confidence as well as the liquidity that people are actually willing to actually inject into the property market. So volume of transactions is actually one. But on top of that, there's also the prices or the total value of transactions, total value of properties that's being transacted is also another measure. Typically, every investor or even a homeowner would actually expect and love to actually see capital appreciation when they actually invest in their properties. But when the appreciation rate becomes too fast, the market becomes a bit bloated in terms of the prices is really growing too fast, too soon, detaching itself from the fundamentals of demand, which is affordability. So affordability is the third paradigm that we need to actually look at. And these are the three which will give rise to the essence of supply and demand to make sure that the market is actually healthy. Just to also add to that, one extra angle is the implication or imperatives of the property market towards the local community, towards the local population, Malaysians specifically. So that is also actually being looked at as another measure.
So in simple terms, how would you describe Malaysia's housing market today, as stabilizing or perhaps still structurally imbalanced?
In general, the health of the residential market is still commendable. It is stabilizing. It has actually grown post-pandemic, and it was still continually growing to an extent until 2024, where the number of transactions were actually very, very high, the third highest since the past 20, 30 years. But to say that it is actually at a healthy level, we also need to look at the affordability level. So this is where the house prices is actually growing at a much faster pace compared to wage increment or increases in the rakyat's income, which makes affordability is a concern. So with that, it is kind of stabilizing because the number of transactions have actually moderated, normalized, I would say, rather than actually a downturn. However, there are still structurally imbalanced factors, mismatch between supply and demand. When we look at it into more specific angle, the mismatch is actually due to where the location of the properties are, the number of concentration of the types of properties, whether the market are actually preferring landed properties, but you're actually injecting too many of the high-rise stratified properties, or even location is actually too far off from amenities, from schools, from places of work. And the integration with the public transportation, effective public transportation. It is not just about having point A to point B it must be from door to door. So it comes to the factor of last mile connectivity to make it more synchronous and in jive with the needs of the population.
You've touched on affordability, where wage increments is moving relatively slower. So affordability often clashes with the location as well. So should the budget encourage developers to build where land is cheaper or make city centre living more attainable through better financing and also planning?
Well, if you were to ask whether you would go to a cheaper area, a cheaper land area versus the city areas where typically land prices are actually much more expensive, there need to be a check and balance between the supply and demand. Not to say that only city areas actually have strong demand and the city fringe areas or in the outskirt areas, in the suburban areas, doesn't have that great of a demand. Because you need to look at it very locally, and it is to be in line with the demand of the population in that particular area. That being said, there need to be two-pronged exercises or two-pronged strategy for urban centers as well as the non-urban centers. The focus would be for urban centers where TOD concept is actually a very strong concept. It has actually been monetized or capitalized by marketing regimes, by marketeers as a great place to actually invest in, to stay in, to actually easy to actually go to your place of work via LRT or MRT. But most of the TODs are typically commanding some form of premium. And because of that, the focus on affordable housing within this needs to be given a bit more focus on, because this is an opportunity, a good opportunity with the increment or betterment of access through public transport. It is these vulnerable groups that actually need TODs the most, because they would actually easily hop in and hop off to their place of work, to their place of residence, and it creates a better, an easier overall cost of living in terms of transportation every month. On top of that, in the suburban areas, some of the areas that we see, there are significant land banks that actually has the potential, and these are for those that are close to new growth areas. In jiving with our NMIP, the new industrial master plan, where new industrial areas are actually popping up, new urban centers or suburban centers, employment hubs, education hubs and whatnot. These can actually be capitalized or basically right on as a growth of a city would be to create these new urban centers. So decentralization has been a form of urban growth in the past, and it can be revisited and planned in a more sustainable and efficient manner.
Regarding this Belanjawan, where we look ahead, is actually being built as a structural budget under the 13th Malaysia Plan or MK13. So in your view, Sulaiman, should it prioritise immediate demand stimulants like perhaps home ownership campaign, HOC, or perhaps stamp duty relief, or longer term supply reforms such as build then sell, land policy and also IBS adoption? And what trade-offs do policymakers need to balance here?
The strike of a balance between short-term measures and long-term measures is crucial. For a market like ours, where we have actually been, facing the challenges of unsold stock, affordability levels, to actually encourage or make it easier for first-time home buyers to make the purchases of their dream houses. We've seen HOC being introduced in the past, where it actually helped through the special programs and special discounts, through the government programs, as well as developers matching to those requirements, giving discounts. It made it easier for developers to actually sell those units, as well as purchasers to actually make those purchases. But these strategies are more short term. It's like, if you were to make an analogy, it's probably like a sugar rush. You do know it tastes nice. You can actually have a quick reaction to it. But sustainably, going long term, how do we make sure that the demand continues to grow? Whether the supply continues to be absorbed by the market or sufficiently matching to what the market needs. So this is where the long-term measures is actually very important. We need to actually focus on the long-term measure. As you actually rightfully pointed out, this is actually a structural reform of a kind through RMK 13, being the first budget in the budget of 2026. It should focus on the long-term measure as well as the short-term measure through programs like land policy reforms, where government lands can actually be converted and made use into more affordable housing, or even IBS. If you talk about IBS, which has been promoted in the market for many years, incentives were actually given, but whether it's being taken up or being adopted widespread enough for the building mechanism or the building construction industry to be more efficient in terms of the time of production, in terms of the time for supply to match the current demand within an area, as well as the cost savings that can be shared down to the purchasers through a saving of or reduction in house prices. So some may actually argue that because of the capital investment for IBS becomes quite a burden for a particular developer, a single developer to actually come in, there could be an idea to just look into nationalizing an IBS operation for Malaysia that can actually serve all the different types of users and designs.
Mm-hmm. So long-term measures or the solutions is a way forward instead of quick win policies. So let's talk about property tax reform. In your opinion, should the budget consider differential rates of vacant units or second homes to curb speculation, also idle inventory? And if that's so, what implementation risk should the government anticipate, especially in terms of enforcement and also market reaction?
Vacancy tax, as the notion of what you just mentioned, is actually a measure that's being implemented in several countries around the world, where it is supposed to curb speculation. Too much speculation. Some speculation is actually good for the market to actually move forward. But when it comes to exorbitant, that's where the market detaches between the supply and the demand level. So vacancy tax, if we were to actually implement in Malaysia, the main concern is how effective and fairly it can be implemented. Because one thing, Malaysia, we are still an emerging nation. We are the ones that the vacancy taxes that's actually applied around the world are mostly done on advanced economies, on advanced nations in matured markets. So for Malaysia, if we have vacancy tax, it would be actually a measure of control for too much overheating of speculative market, where we can probably put a measured approach, a measured mobilization or implementation within certain areas that are more susceptible to market overheating or market overreacting or coming in with an oversupply of residential units or service apartments. We've seen the number of overhang, as how it was known in the past, which is actually completed unsold units. Units are actually already completed but still yet to be sold by the developers. The numbers concentrate more on the major cities. We're actually talking about in the Klang Valley, we actually talk in Johor and also in Penang. These units where the market is actually more susceptible of investors moving in and out, there could be, but we have to actually really study the impact of such implementation, because it could be created as a positive and noble measure to curtail overheating of the market or speculative market, too much of it. But it can also dampen interest by potential investors. So this is where we need to actually see whether the unit is actually vacant for, is it really vacant being caused by a speculator buying and holding for a period of time, or it's actually vacant because it is not being used all the time. It's actually for a holiday home or for a second home or even for a retirement, an investment for retirement purposes. So this is where it is. There's pros and cons to the implementation if there is one, but we need to actually put it in a very specific manner within areas that are actually at risk.
All right, we have a lot more to unpack after this, but for now we'll have to go for a short break. We'll be right back. Alright, welcome back to Pantau Belanjawan, and we're still in the discussion of what it could mean for the property market when it comes to discussing our budget tabling. And still joining me is surveyor Sulaiman Saheh, the Director of Research and Consultancy Services at Rahim Co International, Sdn Bhd. Sulaiman, continuing our discussion earlier before the break, we see that Malaysia's property landscape is anything but uniform. So which states or regions do you think are most likely to be impacted positively or negatively, either one, by the budget's housing measures? And would Greater KL, Penang, Iskandar, or perhaps Sabah and Sarawak feel the biggest shifts? And in your opinion, why?
The markets that will be positively impacted by the budget is hoped to be for the whole country. It is actually hoped to be for the whole country, but of course, certain activities are more concentrated in certain areas where those would actually reap more benefits or more opportunities within them. So areas like Klang Valley, Penang, Iskandar, Malaysia, where these are matured markets where investment have actually been coming in. There's a lot of incentives or basically drivers that drive investors to come and invest because of employment base, because of opportunity of investment, as well as the landscape, the business landscape within those areas. So we see the potential benefits would actually spill over, hoping that it will be quite significantly to all these areas, plus other markets as well. With the budget 2026, so we actually hope that the government will continue on with the major infrastructure plans, which is actually a main artery to actually connect all the urban centers in West Malaysia as well as East Malaysia, where it actually through the highways like Pan Borneo completion, WCE expansion, if we can see going towards the south, supplementing the existing north-south highway, as well as the ECRL to be completed. This would be actually continued on top of the local market, which is like the MRT3 in Klang Valley, or even the Penang LRT development. So and also Johor's RTS to be completed soon. So these would actually improve connectivity and also would actually enhance the activities of businesses as well as residential needs, as well as all the leisurely needs that are demanded by the market. So we see that all these markets would actually have opportunity to benefit, but at the same time, if there are certain measures in terms of controlling or precautionary measures towards new policies of overheating or whatnot, it could be also more impacted within these areas. But that being said, generally, because the budget 2026 is actually designed as a structural reform to actually elevate the market overall. It is not just about the property play per se, it is also about productivity, the income generation capacity. And these are the employment nodes. These are also the employment nodes. So the spillover towards areas between between Penang and Klang Valley, there's Perak, and also spilling over to Kedah towards the north, or even towards Kuantan on the eastern side. So all these spillover effects could also, we are actually hoping for those to actually become a reality.
Now let's talk about policy. So you mentioned earlier it's about the overall. So it comes to the social policy as well. So how can the budget ensure that the vulnerable groups like the single mothers, indigenous communities and also low-income urbanites gain genuine access to affordable housing without stigmatizing or segregating them? And are there low-cost policy wins or administrative reforms that could actually deliver outsized social returns, perhaps things like digital approval processes and also community-led planning or microfinancing schemes?
The essence of the government's policies of late has been on the inclusiveness of the wealth generated and the progress that is to be enjoyed by all Malaysians. The inclusivity angle would actually include really the vulnerable groups, as you actually explained. So with that, urban policies in terms of development of a compact city development, a TOD or inner city areas would actually require some elements, some allocation for these groups. And these may not just be on the B40 or for the low-cost housing. It is actually for the medium-low or the affordable housing segment that is actually for the mass market or the bottom half of the M40 especially. But on top of that, the vulnerable groups, if you talk about single mothers and single fathers also, as a matter of fact, for that, there are also the social agenda in line with the ESG that we have actually seen of late. Services within a city area or even a development to actually provide childcare services, to provide easy and secure facilities for childcare is actually very important. That actually allows the growth of the financial of the family institution on top of their pursuit towards a career. Other than that, the areas that we see the government will continue on is to actually support financially through the incentives given or even the SGKP programs to actually help doing the credit guarantee for first-time home buyers, especially for those without within the gig community, the gig economy, would actually continue. And this would actually help support. And through those, in line with those as well, I think the banks would also play a crucial role in this. Giving subsidized interest rates is actually one. Looking at step-up loans is another. Or even another angle that we have to actually look at is Malaysia is actually moving towards an aging society. So how the market dynamics would actually work with an aged society. There are new demand drivers. There are new forms of premises that's actually being demanded. People who actually scale their properties and whatnot. So how do we actually have a reverse mortgage module, for example, where an owner who is actually in his silver years would actually be able to actually do a reverse mortgage and actually help them sustain their livelihood throughout the years, and having a more scaled down, rightfully sized for their purposes.
We want to know your opinion, Sulaiman, as an expertise and also based on your research at Rahim Co. If you could pick one measure in Belanjawan 2026 that would genuinely move the needle for first-time buyers without inflating prices, what would it be?
That's a very tough one, because just one single measure is going to be very tough. I think one, if we were to sum it all up, is political will. And also to actually address it is a national issue. It is a national issue, but land, as we all know, is a state matter. So the coordination between the federal government and the state government to actually have a streamlined process that is actually not too far off. Of course, there's some deviation, but it's not too far off, so that it becomes a more transparent and easily governed system, especially for developers who are actually coming in, having to actually put in to add on to their development costs, statutory costs, compliance costs, and whatnot, to make those become easier for planning to be done, for budgeting to be done, and as well on top of that, the political will would also be emulated onto the financial sector, so that the banks who are actually funding for the project or funding the end financing for the purchase can actually play a role towards making it more affordable, so that all Malaysians will actually be having a roof over their heads. Another thing is, if we were to actually talk, especially for the vulnerable groups earlier, is the model for affordable housing. The most important thing is about having a secured shelter over your head, a roof over your head. And this may not mean necessarily, not immediately, or maybe it can be actually deferred to later, about owning. So it is also about renting. A rental property, a rental market is of need. We talk about rent-to-own schemes. We talk about how to actually govern, or basically make sure that the rental market is somehow secured in the best interest for the landlord as well as for the tenant, so that it becomes more transparent and it becomes more sustainable for Malaysians to see the Malaysian market grow prosperity.
All right, Sulaiman, in 1 minute, finally, to wrap up this discussion beyond numbers and policy, what are your hopes and also aspirations for Malaysia's property market in the years ahead? Being a structural, being the first budget under RMK 13, and also it's supposed to be a structural reform, I think the big picture needs to be looked at very closely. We do appreciate there are certain short-term measures that are actually needed. And there's also the long-term play or long-term game of elevating the whole market in terms of productivity, economic, a competitive advantage, and making Malaysia a more investor-friendly destination. But at the same time, property market has actually played a crucial role towards enabling those to actually be achieved. In the past, we see that the focus has been on the structural for the economy, and for the property market has actually been following up suit. We hope that the government will actually focus more onto the property market, so that we can see the growth to be more sustainable and something that can benefit rakyats of all levels and strata, as well as their socio-economic background. So indeed, to conclude, it sounds like while the property market is slowly finding its footing, the real task for Budget 2026 will be balancing short-term relief with long-term structural change. So Sulaiman, thank you for joining us, and to our viewers, that was Surveyor Sulaiman Saheh, the Director of Research, Rahim Co International, Sdn Bhd, and this has been Pantau Belanjawan. I'm Nabila Khalida, and thanks for watching.